Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. The NFL is on center stage this week. It's the Super Bowl. It's Sunday in Arizona. The Browns will also share in the spotlight with Joe Thomas expected to be announced in the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2023. Here to discuss, as always, is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. What's up, Chud?
Scott, how are you? It's good to talk after not talking last week. With the NFL, with the extra game, pushing the Super Bowl, it's kind of weird because now like the NBA has a lot of news going on this week, and the Super Bowl's later. I'm so used to it being a week earlier.
No, that's a really good point. I was wondering that we're taping this Thursday morning. I was wondering that a little earlier because the NBA trade deadline, right, is coming up.
Yeah.
Or it's today. So I was like,
Yeah.
man, it's weird that ESPN, I had ESPN on, they got a bunch of NBA conversation during Super Bowl week, and I'm glad you pointed that out because I'd kind of forgotten the reason the timing is messed up is because the Super Bowl's a week later because of the 17th game now.
Makes me wonder. I'm almost wondering if I like the 17th game. I'm totally going off tracks here because
Right.
it's just not something we would have planned on talking about. But I wonder if I like it better just with 16 games. I don't know.
Yeah, the fact that you're still playing football in the middle of February, I think there's some things I like about that, right? Because we kind of miss football when it's away.
Yeah.
But especially if you're our age, or I'm a little older than you, but you get, you're just so used to it, right? You're so used to the calendar of sporting events and what goes on and what do. You just kind of naturally go through it. So it's interesting. I mean, I think the 17th game is probably doesn't do anybody any good, except it raises a ton of money. So therefore, it's not going away, and we're going to have to get used to it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We'll get on to the Super Bowl here in a moment and relive our predictions and talk about the AFC and NFC championship games. Yeah. But first, the big story. Obviously, we're going to find out tonight if it's official. But Joe Thomas, big moment for Browns fans. Obviously, a big moment for Thomas. I'm working on a story that will only air if he gets in, and that will be on Friday morning on Go on Channel 3. Cheap plug, but I read the article that you wrote about him. Just reading a couple different things and getting it, listening to a few different perspectives, and there's nobody that does not think he deserves to be a Hall of Famer, and most people feel it should happen tonight.
Yeah, agreed. And I wrote a couple this week. I talked to Joe last week, and then I talked to Alex Mack and John Greco and Joe Bitonio and Tony Pashos, who were former linemen with him, and then Phil Savage, the GM that drafted him in 2007. And, I wrote the stories assuming that he's going to get in. So from that perspective, I hope he does. I hope I'm not just kind of previewing something that doesn't happen, but the expectation is that he gets in. Even Joe, he's not taking it for granted, but he said he felt confident when I asked him about it. Phil Savage said he's a surefire, bona fide first ballot guy. So that's my expectation heading into tonight. I'll be surprised if he doesn't get in, and he'll eventually get in. I think that seems like a certainty to me. But there's something special about being a first ballot guy. There's something, I think, especially when you expect it, then it would be disappointing. So I think it'd be disappointing for Joe. So I don't want him to have to go through that. But yeah, he's a 10-time Pro Bowler, right? In the 10 seasons he was healthy, he was a Pro Bowler. He's a 6-time first-team All-Pro. And it all happened with and we can't forget the snap streak, right? The 10,363 straight snaps to start his career, which everyone believes is an NFL record. It's tough to figure out if they're missing somebody from 50 years ago, but the belief is that that's an NFL record and unprecedented. You put all that in a pile, and you remember watching him play, and he was so good that it feels like he should be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I expect him to get in. And I'll tell you what, working on these stories, Chud, not got me excited for it, but maybe that is it got me excited for Joe in just listening to him talk, listening to people talk about him, it's a cool moment. It's a cool moment for him. It's a cool moment for his former teammates, for the organization. I think for Browns fans, we mentioned it a couple weeks ago when we talked. Is it the best moment since the Browns have been back in 1999? And I think there's an argument to be made for that. And he's certainly, since he got drafted in 2007, he's been a beacon in, shining light in these really difficult times for the Browns, right? Loss after loss after loss. And Joe was always, not only did he play at a Hall of Fame level, he became a member of the community. Fans loved him. He's a great guy to deal with. He's still connected to the city and the team. So I just think there's so many good parts of this story.
Yeah. To think that he would go 10-6 in his first season, right? And then never see a winning season again. And to experience 1-31, it's amazing that he was able to keep his head up high, and he was always great with the media, right?
Oh, he was fantastic with the media. And just last week I texted him. I'm like, hey, Joe, when you have a chance before that Thursday night tonight, the NFL honors, I'd love to talk to you for 3 minutes. 2 hours later, I get a call from Joe. And
Wow.
That's not unusual since, I've done stories on Joe Bitonio. Hey, Joe, can I talk to you? He gets back to you. Like, he's just been that guy. And even back in the day when he was playing, right? So I covered his whole career. I think it was him. He had put up a kind of a poster of all the beat writers, their mugshots, their pictures with the name under it, so people could learn our names, right? And I thought that was not a nice thing to. I thought it was a nice thing to do, but I thought it was important, right? That he thought it was important for everyone to say, "Hey, there's a name with a face. These people are going to be here every day. Let's get to know them a little bit." And then, Joe, I remember Joe would stand there, and this is earlier in his career because I got a story I want to tell about late in his career. But early in his career, he would just stand there in his locker day after day, and one at a time, reporters would go up to him and talk to him, right? Like, he would do the gaggle, but then if you wanted to ask him something specific, or you wanted to ask him something on a Friday and he'd already talked on a Wednesday, he would just stand there and would talk to everyone. And that's just, it's unusual. You've been in their locker rooms, Chud. That doesn't happen a lot, right? And this is happening with the best player on the team, right? And a future Hall of Famer. So, I'm sure that's part of the reason that I have a soft spot for Joe. But yeah, I think it speaks highly to his character. And when you talk about the losing, right? Yes, his only winning season is a rookie, which, is tragic at a level, right? That he comes in thinking, hey, this is what it's going to be like. And then it's downhill from there, and almost straight downhill, because it ends with, 1-15 and 0-16. But during that time, and Phil Savage pointed this out, he said the snap streak is more impressive because of that, right? Most guys, you think, okay, their motivation is we have a chance to go to the playoffs. Maybe we can win a Super Bowl this year, which is why I'm working harder, which is why I'm out there every snap. Joe didn't have that. Like, early in seasons, they knew they weren't going to go to the playoffs, right? Even late in his career, before the season started, you knew they weren't going to go to the playoffs. Yet, he was determined to be out there every snap for his teammates. And that's really remarkable, and again, speaks to him as a person and his character.
Yeah. And this is not meant to belittle the Hall of Fame, because obviously it's the highest individual achievement you can have, and it is a huge deal. But, and I hope this comes across the right way, the fact that we have to put this up there as possibly the best moment since the Browns returned in 99 just goes to show you how terrible things have been for this organization.
Oh, there's no doubt. Right. And there is that contrast, right? But I think this is a good time to, not that it's not part of the story, but I think this is a good time to focus on the positive, right? Like, yes, he lifted himself above all the crap that was going on, right? All the controversy, all the whatever, the 20 quarterbacks he blocked for, the coaches, the ownership change, the GM changes, right? He was able to raise himself above that just because he was such a good player, right? Like, in order to stand out at a left tackle, I mean, left tackle is a prime position, right? But it's still on the offensive line. So you have to be special to stand out as a left tackle. And then to stand out as a left tackle on a team that doesn't win and never goes to the playoffs and doesn't play in prime time like the Browns didn't when Joe was here, like just keeps adding to the excellence, right? The reason why I expect him to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. So yes, that's part of the story. But I guess my point is, I don't think that defines Joe, right? And I think the fact that he is, at least in my expectation, going to be the first ballot Hall of Famer, I think that means he transcended all the stuff that he had to go with, which he'll tell you none of that was in his control, right? So he controlled what he could control, and that was being there every play for as long as he could and performing at an incredibly high level.
What's your story about him later in his career?
The first story I wrote earlier in the week was just about the pain that he played to get to those, to 10,363 snaps, which he is so proud of, right? Like that's the thing he's most proud of is that consecutive streak snap because it speaks to work ethic and dedication and perseverance, all that stuff. So I said, Joe, tell me the worst pain you were in. He goes, I think it was the end of the 2012 season. He goes, I had back spasms for 4 straight weeks at the end of the season. And anybody who's had back issues, like it's debilitating. Like you can't get off the ground sometimes. I've tried to play golf with back spasms. It's impossible. And to play an NFL game every snap for 4 straight weeks with back spasms, to me is unfathomable. And he did it. And he said his wife had to tie his shoes. He was on muscle relaxers to try to get the spasms to stop. So he was tired all the time, could barely stand. And then he'd start to feel better at the end of the week. And then he'd play a game and it was back to the drawing board. So that was his number one story. But then I asked him, I said, Joe, I heard that, you had a heart. He couldn't, like at the end of his career, he couldn't barely practice. He had knee surgery the off seasons before his final couple of years. He wasn't sure if he was going to play that last year, but he did. But his knees, but I think one was worse than the other, were so bad that he couldn't really practice and he couldn't even stand to watch practice because the knee hurt him so much. But yet every, let's call it Thursday, he would come into the locker room and talk to the media for 10 or 15 minutes and he would stand up. So I said, well, if you can't even stand to watch practice, how can you stand to talk to the media? And he said that he would have to get medicated before he talked to the media. He would take pain medication, talk to the media, and then he said the training room was right by the locker room, and he would get back into the training room and collapse like he had just gone through an excruciating workout, and all he had done was stand for 10 or 15 minutes. And the fact that he was in that much pain yet continued to play, I think is just unbelievable.
Man, that is wild. Just to talk. I mean, he could have skipped. I mean, why wouldn't he just skip some of those media sessions?
Right.
Didn't want to lead on to that he was hurting or just his obligation. That's just the way he is.
I think that's just the way it was. The media wants to talk to me. The media want to talk to me. I talk to the media. This is, it's in your contract. You're supposed to. I'm sure he could have arranged it so he was sitting at a podium instead of standing. So maybe he didn't want it to be like, hey, because he never made it about himself, right? He never really, until after his career, really detailed how bad it was, right? Like he never called that much attention to himself. I think it was just, hey, this is what I have to do, and I'm going to have to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, that's rare. How about the way he looks now? Because you see a lot of former players, they look different going in a different direction, if you know what I mean. Yeah. I mean, he's certainly not the monstrosity he once was, or whatever the word you would call it.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was probably, I don't know what he played at 310. I think that's what they list him as in like Pro Football Reference. I don't know what he is now, 230, 240. I mean, he looks fantastic. And I think, again, that's just speaks to his discipline, speaks to his focus that he got done. He's like, okay, this is not good for me, especially when you have the bad knees like that. I got to drop some weight. I know he works out like crazy still. I talked to Tony Pashos, and I could tell stories forever, Chud, and there's a couple more I want to tell, but I was talking to Tony Pashos, and he said, they're on this text chain. That's one of the stories I wrote. The story I wrote for today was all these linemen, they still connect on these group texts, not text chain, these group texts. And it's, Mitchell Schwartz and Alex Mack and Tony Pashos and Eric Steinbach and a bunch of old, former linemen. And Pashos is like, hey, we talk about everything. We talk about workouts. And he said, Joe has a workout he does, and it's a one-leg press. And he goes, he does it, and he tries to do 50 reps with one leg with a bunch of weight. And then you have to match it with the other leg. And, Tony said he asked Joe, he goes, do you have a name for this? And he's like, no. And then they're trying to figure it out, do they name it Joe's Pain or, they're trying to name it after Joe. But can you imagine Joe's 38, gone through everything he's gone through physically, and he's still out there doing these kind of leg presses, 5 years after he's been retired. I think that also speaks to kind of the physical freak he was, right? And when I talked to Phil Savage, he's like, hey, he wasn't a Jonathan Ogden, who's 6'8" or whatever. But Joe did have elite physical skills. Even though he might not have looked like he did, he had elite physical skills. And, he still does at 38 and 5 years retired.
Wow. What other stories you got for us before we move on?
Yeah, just real quick. So I'm asking all the guys, Alex Mack and Batonio and Greco, your favorite stories of Joe. And, we talk all about Joe, his personality, and he's so likable. And, they told all these stories about how fun he is to hang out with. And if you knew you were going to be spending time with Joe, you knew it was going to be fun. So there's that side of Joe. But he's also a crazy competitor, right? And he wants to win, and he wanted to be the best. So I said, Alex, what's your favorite story? He goes, I love telling the story. He said he's a rookie, and the coaches are all over him about hand placement for blocking. So he complained to Joe. He goes, Joe, the coach, keeps harping on me. And Joe says, well, did you ever think of just putting your hand where the coach tells you to put your hand? And just as simple as that, he boiled it down. And Alex is like, that just speaks to who Joe is, right? He's like, yeah, just make it simple. Do what they're telling you to do, and you'll be a better player, right? So in the way Alex said it is probably funnier than the way I'm telling it, but it just is matter. He goes, as matter of factly, just put your hand where the coach tells you to put it. So then I'm talking to Batonio, and he said it's 2014, and he's a rookie, and Joe's on his left side because Joe plays left guard, and Ryan Seymour is filling in because Alex Mack's out with a broken leg. So you got this young guy at center who hasn't played a lot. And Joel said they're playing Indianapolis. And they get to the line of scrimmage, and Seymour makes a call, and Joe Thomas makes a call, and they're opposite calls. And Joe goes, I don't know what to do. I'm panicking. He goes, we usually listen to the center. So he does what Seymour tells him to do. Because after the play, he goes, Joe is screaming at him, drops an F-bomb. Don't ever not listen to me at the line of scrimmage ever again. And Joe goes, okay, I learned right there that I got this Hall of Famer next to me. I'm going to follow whatever he says, even though we're used to following the center. And then Joe said he gets done with the game, and his mom texts him and says, was Joe mad at you? Looked like he was upset with you during the game. And Joe's like, it's no big deal. And then John Greco, who played mostly right guard in his time here, was with the Browns for 6 years with Joe Thomas. He's playing right guard. They're playing Jacksonville. They're playing Jacksonville, but he's not at right guard. He's at center because they have, Alex Mack's hurt. So Alex Mack, if you remember, Chud, they break the huddle, and Mack would sprint to the line of scrimmage. And Joe Thomas, right? And Joe Thomas liked that. He said the center needs to be there first. You got to set the ball. You got to look at the defense. Well, Greco's used to playing guard, so Greco's playing center, and he's kind of just walking up to the line. And he said all of a sudden Joe starts screaming at him, like, you got to run to the line. And Greco's like, don't be screaming at me. So they're yelling at each other at the line of scrimmage before a play. And Greco says the Jacksonville D linemen and linebackers are laughing out loud because Greco and Thomas are screaming at each other at the line of scrimmage. And, I think it just speaks to the intensity that Joe had, which obviously you knew he had it, right? You don't play in the NFL. You don't become the Hall of Famer that he's going to become without that intensity. But, when you see him on TV and you talk to him, he's just a normal, kind of down-to-earth, even goofy guy. But he had this drive that when you're on the field came out, and it came out even with, in the form of him yelling at his teammates.
Yeah. I guess we should have known when he skipped the NFL draft to go fishing into Wisconsin, he would be perfect for Cleveland.
Right. I mean, that's true. And Phil Savage said the same thing. I mean, I could go on and on, but Savage said, yeah, it was the perfect fit, the marriage of Joe with Cleveland. And you're exactly right, Chud. The fact that he went fishing rather than go to New York on draft day really set that tone for who Joe is and why he would fit in so well here. And I'll tell one last story. He could have asked for a trade, right? Like, I don't think he had a no-trade clause. He told me he didn't. So at the end of his career, he could have said, I need you guys to trade me, or I'd really like you to trade me. We see Kyrie Irving say he wants to get traded, and he gets traded 2 days later, right? So we see it happen. We see it happen in the league, right? Aaron Rodgers could get traded this offseason. So, but Joe didn't want to get traded. He wanted to start and finish his career in Cleveland, and he's taking extra pride in the fact that he doesn't think there's going to be a whole lot of Hall of Famers after him that spent their entire career with one team, right? So that's something he's really proud of. But at the end of the career, he still wants to be here. But there's discussion, right? The Browns are in a rebuild. They're getting rid of assets. Do they trade him? And he said Peyton Manning called him because Peyton was with the Broncos then, and their left tackle had gotten hurt. So Joe told us at the Sports Awards, and I followed up with, he said Peyton called him and said, hey, do what you got to do to get traded. He goes, even if you got to go take a dump on the GM's desk, and go do it because we need you to come to Denver. And I said, Joe, did Peyton really say that? He said, yes. He told me to do that. And I said, did you ever think about it? Did you ever think about trying to work your way out of town? And he said, no. He goes, I know it was Peyton Manning. He goes, but I wanted to spend my whole career in Cleveland. He goes, I always was optimistic that we we're going to figure it out. And I just think that, again, that speaks to who he is and why he is so beloved, rightfully so, in Cleveland. I'm glad you gave me the time there to tell that, because I really enjoyed the research that I did in the last couple of weeks. Not that I didn't know a lot of stuff about Joe, but just hearing these stories retold, I think it's interesting, and I think I hope people read them, and then it gives people, I guess, further reason to be excited about Thursday night and the announcement of the Hall of Fame class. The fact that he wanted to stay here his whole career, and doing the research I did in the interviews the last couple of weeks, just reaffirmed how special the connection with Cleveland is, and why I think there should be a lot of excitement heading into the announcement, right, Thursday night, and then assuming he gets into this class, the build up until August, right? Like, I've never covered the Hall of Fame. I assume I'll do it if Joe's there, whether or not the Browns are playing down there, which I would expect they'd be playing in that Hall of Fame game. But just to be down there, Browns fans at the Hall of Fame, it's something I've never experienced, right? We see other fan bases come to Canton and celebrate their guys. And for it to be Joe, I think that's going to be cool. And when we talk about it being one of the bright spots, the few bright spots since '99, I think that will kind of be the culmination of it.
Sure. All right, let's move on here. A couple things before we get to the Super Bowl. Myles Garrett, any concern there with the toe injury?
No, I mean, first of all, the Browns don't play for 7 months, so dislocated toe should be fine. But he tweeted out, all good. Certainly a worry when you see him kind of limp off the obstacle course stage at the Pro Bowl event. But I don't think it's going to be a big deal. He says it's not. X-rays are negative. Looks like he's fine.
Okay. How about Joe Woods landing a new gig?
Yeah, I think that's good for Joe. When we talked to those guys at the end of the season after he'd been fired after the finale, the consensus was he's going to land on his feet, and he did. And staying as a coordinator is important, right? You don't want to take that step back to secondary coach. Not that it never happens. I mean, it happens with coaches all the time, but it's good for Woods that he gets to remain a coordinator. Now, in New Orleans, Dennis Allen, it's his defense. he's expected to call the plays. Joe will probably focus a lot on the secondary, but to keep that title, to be an integral part of, the game planning and the defense, it's good for Joe Woods.
Anything else Browns related before we move on to the Super Bowl?
I don't think so. A little bit of a dead period. Combine coming up. I think March 1st is the first date of the combine. So we might have a little bit of action before then. But, nothing too big. I think that's it, Sean.
Yeah. How about LeBron James real quick? That was pretty phenomenal.
It really was. And I know you guys did a bunch on Channel 3. And I'm not a huge NBA guy, especially during, regular season. I mean, I'll watch the Cavs, but I don't, watch a whole bunch of Laker games. So I hadn't seen him play. I probably hadn't seen him play a whole game since whenever, the playoffs he'd been in. But obviously I tuned in Tuesday night, and it was a lot of fun, and it was cool, and it just brought back so many LeBron memories.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just the fact that a guy could live up to the expectations like he has. It truly is incredible,
Yeah, I think that's one of the big takeaways, and we talked about it a little bit before we started recording. Lived up to all the expectations right from the time he was 16, and has never gotten in trouble, right? So his whole life, most of his life, right, has been spent in the public eye, and he's carried himself, in my opinion, so well, and then played at a level where he's one of the 1, 2, 3 best players in the history of basketball. It's really mind-boggling, everything he's had to go through to get to this level, and then score as many points when he did, or as he has, when he's not a guy that dominates the ball, so to speak, right? He's not afraid to pass. How many times when he was in Cleveland earlier in his career did we talk about him passing instead of taking a shot? So it's not like he's been a guy that's all he did, right? Was shoot. And yet he still was so efficient that he becomes the all-time leading scorer. It's a huge testament to him.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's we didn't talk last week. AFC NFC Championship games. You went 2-0. Congrats. You got the Super Bowl dead on, man. Eagles, Chiefs. I got the Chiefs in. I had the Niners, so I went 1-1. You went 2. I put you one game up on me overall in the playoffs. The Eagles, it's tough. I mean, it's really hard to dissect that game when you play a whole game without a quarterback, basically. That was kind of disappointing to watch because it just turned out to be a non-factor of a game.
Oh, there's no doubt. And, obviously I'm glad that I was 2-0 and it kind of rallied because I'd struggled picking games, especially against the spread, picking games earlier in the playoffs. So I liked how the championship weekend went. But, if you pick the 49ers or you're rooting for the 49ers, how can you even take that game, not seriously, but you have to throw it out because your quarterback gets hurt right away. Your backup quarterback gets hurt. The game could have gone so many different ways. Not that Philly wouldn't have necessarily won, right? Because I think Philly is a really good team. But you just never know. And, losing your quarterback, who happened to be your third string quarterback at the beginning of the year anyway, it just put the 49ers in an unwinnable situation.
Yeah. It was tough to watch, and you never felt like they had a chance. They couldn't even pass towards the end of the game. Chiefs, Bengals, a lot of people, or Bengals fans at least, blaming the referees there. But that certainly was a way more of an exciting game to watch, and obviously that's building into a nice little rivalry there.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Burrow and Mahomes, they're going to be really fun to watch as we go forward. They've been fun the last 2 years. I'm glad you brought up officiating, Chud. And I know it wasn't perfect, and I get it. I get the frustration from some fans, but I used to be a guy that would be overly critical of officials, whether I was playing in a game, whether it's Rex Oppel or whatever, or watching a game or being in a game. I used to be all over the officials, and I've come to a point where now I despise the constant discussion about officials. bad calls happen. Yes, you're trying to get rid of as many as possible. I think the NFL does a good job overall getting rid of as many bad calls as possible with the challenge system and with, New York in the referee's ear. I get that they missed some. I get that they might have missed some against Cincinnati, although I think a lot of the calls people pointed at, I agreed with the calls. I thought the late hit out of bounds was the right call. I did not think I did not think it was a block in the back on the punt return that set up the last drive. I understand why they killed the clock on that one play and made them redo third down. I mean, I've been in press boxes. You can see the back judge running in, and when he's running in, the play has to stop. Whether or not they ran the play or not, it has to stop. So the mechanics might have been off, but that was the right call. So I'm not saying every call is right. Obviously, they're not all right. I also think that if you watched all 22 players every snap, you'd go, there's a million things that could be called. Anyway, so that's my rant is I'm sick of the constant nitpicking of every call and how bad the officiating is. I think it's just part of the game. And yes, we need to try to get rid of as many bad calls as possible, but I don't think talking about it incessantly and tweeting about it is doing anybody any good. And I think it actually hurts the enjoyment of watching the game.
Yeah. Well, for me, obviously Cincinnati could have won that game and it was very tight, but I just didn't think that they could go in there again and win. It's so hard. Would they beat them 3 times in a row? I mean, imagine winning 4 in a row against a great team like Kansas City. And I just felt like Mahomes, really had a chip on his shoulder all year after the way it ended last year. So I'm not surprised to see them back in the Super Bowl. Again, not surprised Kansas City's representing the AFC, and not totally surprised at Philadelphia either. I mean, here's the thing though. If you pick and neither of us did at the beginning, it's tough to pick both number 1 seeds because you just don't think that you figure one of them will maybe go down, but that's what you got. You got your number 1 seeds are right there.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's how I felt. Like you feel there's going to be an upset. You feel like it's hard to pick chalk. I do think, I don't think there's any debate about this. The Chiefs' road to the Super Bowl was harder than the Eagles, right? Not only did the Eagles play a Giants team that I thought overachieved this year, and then they drill them in the second round of the playoffs. Then you get the 49ers team that loses its quarterback early, right? So I'm not saying the Eagles would have lost, but their road has been easy, where the Chiefs had, the Mahomes injury. They had a relatively tight game against Jacksonville, right? And then they play their, nemesis, Cincinnati. So I think it's interesting as we talk about the Super Bowl matchup is, has Philly been tested enough? It looks like they've dominated, and they have, but I think their opponents have been weaker given the circumstances. So to me, that's one of the reasons, and we're going to get to our picks, but that's something you have to weigh, right? Is, okay, Philly hasn't had a close game in the playoffs. Jalen Hurts, we haven't had to see him make plays in the fourth quarter to win games. While Mahomes can do it, you've seen the Chiefs be battle-tested as recently as their last game, right? So I think that's an interesting element heading into this matchup.
All right, prediction time. You ready?
I am.
You want to go first or second?
I'll go second. You ready?
All right. Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah. I picked them to go to the Super Bowl, and I just feel like they're the best team in the NFL right now. I just think Kansas City is going to win. I think, Philadelphia's favored. I think 1.5, and I'm going to go with a lot of what you just said there. I mean, as great as Philadelphia has looked, they've looked that way, as you had mentioned, against teams that aren't so amazing with the injuries in San Francisco, the Giants, and I had mentioned that last time. So while I do think Philadelphia's been impressive, and Jalen Hurts, listen, he's been phenomenal, and there is no doubt they're one of the best teams in the NFL and deserve to be there. So this has nothing to do with the Eagles as much as I just think it's Kelsey, it's Mahomes, it's Reed. I just think it's Kansas City's year. So I'm going to go with a weird score. I don't know why. I'm going to go 29-27 Chiefs.
Wow. That's interesting, Chud. I like all those reasons. I have a really hard time picking against Patrick Mahomes, but I'm going to pick against him. And
wow.
Yeah. And I don't know if I would have done this before the playoffs started. And just real quick, my kind of keys are how healthy is Mahomes, right? I mean, you don't heal from a high ankle right away. And he played well against the Bengals, but it limited it, right, to some degree.
Well, he was healthy enough to beat one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest team in the NFL.
Was, right, but he wasn't himself, right? I mean, they didn't score a ton of points. He didn't have the same scrambling ability. Yes, he had the big one late. But you saw him pull up on that one, he rolled to his left and he was in obvious pain. So I think he's not 100%. He's still great, not 100%. I think that could be a factor. Can the O-line of Kansas City block the Eagles? The Eagles have a big-time front four. They have like 70 sacks in the regular season, and it's continued in the playoffs. Yes,
true.
And the Chiefs line has been better, and the Chiefs line played well against Cincinnati, but it's still a question mark, especially when Mahomes' mobility, I would expect, to be limited. Can Kansas City's young corners hold up, right, against Hurts at quarterback, but then you got Brown and Smith at receiver for the Eagles. And then do they have an answer for the Eagles' run game that has so much reliance on Hurts, right? It's got Hurts. It's got the three-headed monster. We saw that they just kind of chipped away and wore away at that Niners defense. Yes, Kansas City's defense is better, but is it good enough to stop what feels like a unique offense with the Eagles? Now, if Kansas City gets up, that helps. If they get a lead and you make Hurts throw the ball more, that could change how the game goes. And then for the Eagles, I just think the Eagles are more talented across the roster. And this is a bigger picture discussion for down the road, but a lot of that it's because the Eagles have Jalen Hurts on a rookie quarterback, and the Chiefs are paying Patrick Mahomes a ton of money, right? And that does affect roster construction. So I think the Eagles are just more talented from position to position, not a quarterback, but position to position. I love their offensive line. I love their defensive line. So a lot for me comes down to, is Jalen Hurts going to play well enough? Is he going to make enough big-time throws? Because I don't think you win the Super Bowl without your quarterback doing it. But he's played at a great level all year, and I would expect him to continue to do that. So I don't feel great picking against Mahomes like I started this, but I'm going to go Eagles 27-24.
All right. Wow. All right. So we 27-24 Eagles. I have 29-27 Chiefs. So the bottom line is we are in disagreement, which means you're either going to beat me by 2 in the playoff run, or we are going to end up tied.
Yeah, we don't have to tiebreaker, Joe. We got to do a race or play golf or something.
Well, I'm not going to do golf because I know you'll beat me there. That's for sure. But I mean, it's good though. I like that we have differing opinions here, and I like your best argument is the Eagles D line, and they do that even by just rushing forward, not even blitzing all the time. So there's no question. You make an excellent point there, and Jalen Hurts has been awesome. But I don't know. There's just something about that Mahomes Kelsey mystique, and I just think. And granted, all right, listen, if Mahomes does have issues with his ankle and he is not 100%, then next time we talk, I might say, hey, listen, all right, if you had a healthy Mahomes, maybe it would have been a different outcome. But let's see. I mean, if he is 100% healthy, I would like to see, obviously the best version of himself as far as a fan and wanting to watch the game, right? Isn't that what we all want? I mean, we want to see the best that we can out there.
Oh, so, there's no doubt. And I think he's going to be good, and I think he's going to be close. But, if you expect the game to come down to 2 or 3 points, is there a play that he doesn't make, right, that could have turned the game? I just think that's possible.
Yeah.
You know, and hey,
right.
last thing for you, when you were picking the score, you went a little higher than I did. I was really struggling with that. Like I thought about going in the 30s, and I wanted to keep it in the 20s. And I don't have a great reason for that, except sometimes teams get off to slow starts in the Super Bowl. Right, it takes a while to heat up. What do you think? Are you thinking this game could be really like a high scoring game?
Yeah, I just think that. I mean, it's so hard to stop that Chiefs offense, right? I mean. They got 23 points there against Cincinnati, and I'm only looking for them to get 6 more, right? I just think that the Eagles, it seems like they're pretty balanced with their attack. I mean, when they're running the ball, man, they are dangerous. So I think that I don't think the Chiefs defense is dominating. I think they can be scored on. So I just think I don't know. I just think it will be one of those games where you're just going to have some exciting plays, maybe, a defensive touchdown that might help get that score up there. I look at the over under, I think it's like 51.5 or 50, somewhere in that range. Sure. So I typically like to side with Vegas, if that was in the, more in the 40s, like 41, 42, I'd probably think differently. But I think that's one thing that's probably points me in that direction. Obviously, I'm going over, probably because my instinct tells me, 50-51, I'm taking the under. So I'm going contrarian, right? Like thinking in my mind, well, you would definitely be under that. So now I'm going to go over. So that's kind of where I came to that score.
No, I get that. And I do think it shapes up for a chance to be really exciting. I don't know if I think that I wonder if I think the Chiefs have an advantage if it gets to be a high scoring game. I don't know. I guess that would my thought would be that if the Chiefs can score enough against the Eagles, right, figure out a way to score against that pass rush, then they got a better chance, right? If it stays lower, then it probably suits Philly better. They run it more, they control the clock, they get pressure on it. But yeah, I just think that's interesting because I was going back and forth on that too. So
well, and here's another thing to think about too, and that's the simple case of Hurts has never been to the Super Bowl and Mahomes has, right? I mean, there's a major difference there. Listen, we're human beings, right? I mean, we've talked about this many times. The pressure, how to prepare. Like the Chiefs know how to handle this week. I mean, all right, listen, the Eagles, they won it. What 2000 was it? 17, 18.
Yeah,
was it the
ago?
5 years
season? Yeah.
But different coaching staff, right? I mean,
mostly different players. Yeah, mostly different players too.
Yeah. So the Chiefs are closer to their Super Bowl, and I think they know how to handle this week a little bit more going in. I think prep is important. We've heard stories before about how players have, interesting stories from the night before a Super Bowl, and how players handle the week, with personal life and practicing and the big stage. And, I think there's something to be said about that. Kansas City has a little more experience. Mahomes has, so maybe I'm going to draw on that a little bit as well. So I'm looking for any X factors that might point me in the direction of Kansas City.
I tell you what, those are great points, Chud. They really are. You could probably throw the coaching matchup in there. I mean, Sirianni's been great, but Andy Reid's done this. Andy Reid's one of the best ever. I like the points you're making, and so many times I pick based on quarterback, and I would have to pick Mahomes, right? If you just picked on basing it on quarterback, but I'm not, because I'm looking at the entirety of the roster, and I may regret that. Mahomes might be enough.
But it's not like you have a backup quarterback, or like a quarterback that somehow the team has gotten there despite him. I mean, the quarterback you're going with has been incredible this year, and they're there because of him.
Right, but he's young and he's never been there, right? So yeah, I mean,
right. No, precisely, and I think that's a huge edge to Mahomes, no question. I mean, the pressure that could be felt in this game, and the prep that leads up to it, certainly. And Sirianni, did I catch this right? He was on Kansas City staff, right? And Reid let him go?
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah, that's right. I read something about that today. Yeah. When Reid took over, he didn't retain him. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a whatever bone to pick there, a little revenge factor. Not that I'm not sure I have that. Well, I'm not sure that shows up Sunday night, but I know Sirianni's thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I feel bad in my analysis of the AFC and NFC Champions game. I don't feel like I brought it strong, but I think it's also because it was a while ago, and also I'm trying to get over it. So that terrible 49ers game, really. Right. But we do our helmets. I've talked about this before. We do our helmets, in my family. I've got 2 daughters and my wife, and we pick helmets randomly out of a hat. So I got eliminated from that as well. So my wife has the Chiefs, and my daughter Brooklyn has the Eagles, and she's never won it before. Of the 4 of us, everyone's won except for Brooklyn, and I think we've been doing this since like 2014. So she's hoping that she can finally win this because she's the only one who hasn't. So the pressure's on.
All right, well there's another reason to root for the Eagles.
There you go. Yeah. All right, I got to take a nap.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get up at 2:00 in the morning. Hey, Chud, thanks for the time, buddy.
That's right.
I appreciate it. So we got big night tonight with Joe Thomas and the big night Sunday night. So thanks everybody for listening. You can find all my work at brownzone.com, and we'll talk to you soon.